The 1845 rulebook for the Knickerbocker Baseball Club established baseball as the game we know today. For the first 30 years, players played the game barehanded. The invention of the baseball glove was facilitated by two concomitant factors, the increase in pitch speeds and the shortening of the distance between the catcher and home plate. Baseball gloves were developed with a singular purpose in mind: hand protection. Early gloves were nothing more than buckskin gloves repurposed from bricklayers' or railroad brakeman gloves. In time, they would become specialized tools designed for the purpose of fielding. Netting, the pocket, and the open back would become staples of the increasing complexity of the baseball glove, for which inventors would hold patents for their designs. Early adopters would be labeled unmanly for using them, though in time, their use would become commonplace. The development of the baseball glove has even contributed to fielders committing fewer errors over time. In the 1840s and 1850s, there were no regularly scheduled games like there are today. Instead, teams would face each other when one ball club challenged another. In 1858, Brooklyn, a city at the time and not a borough like today, challenged New York to a best 2-out-of-3 match. The twist was that each city would send their 9 best players, drawn from the best clubs in the area. Baseball would have its first All-Star game. Officials recognized the unique nature of the event. They anticipated a large turnout and decided to charge admission, a first for baseball. For their All-Star event, they chose the Fashion Race Course in Long Island, New York. The track was just a stone's throw from modern-day Citi Field, where the New York Mets play today. The Fashion Race Course would be the first enclosed park in baseball history. It had 10,000 seats with standing room for 50,000 more. The sod of the infield was shaved down to the dirt to create a makeshift baseball diamond. Fly balls were able to be caught for an out off a single bounce, and the unhewn surface of the crude track made fielding extraordinarily difficult. The game was scheduled for Tuesday, July 13th, though the game was postponed for a week due to rain. The once lively track sat awash. Organizers, players, and fans patiently waited for the field to dry. On the 20th, both sides met at last. The clubs paraded to the game through the streets of Long Island in carriages decorated with their team flag. More than 7,800 fans turned out for the first game. The match was played under the National Association of Baseball Players rules. 16 clubs met a year prior to establish the first organization governing baseball. Among the rules established at the convention was that 9 innings would be played, instead of the previous rule that said that the game ended when one team scored 21 runs. 9-man teams, instead of the loosey-goosey whoever shows up to play doctrine established by the famed Knickerbocker rules some 13 years earlier. And finally, the called strike. The Fashion Racecourse game featured the very first reported instance of a called strike. Umpire Doc Adams, who was a member of the New York Knickerbockers, called a strike in the 3rd game of the series. New York would win the match 2-1. In the original Knickerbocker rules, swinging at a pitch added to the strike count, yet abstaining from swinging at a ball, be it fair or not, was not penalized. Whether a pitch was deemed unfair or if a batter was merely being too picky was left to the discretion of the umpire. Well into the 1870s, umpires hesitated to make calls on balls or strikes as doing so was perceived as an attack on a player's honor. Instead of routine judgments, these calls were regarded as sanctions for unsportsmanlike conduct, a departure from the nuanced interplay between pitcher and batter seen in the contemporary game. It wasn't until the 1880s that every pitch received a definitive ruling as either a ball or a strike. The count would not be called out by umpires until the late 19th century. The 1845 Knickerbocker rules synthesized previous decades of bat and ball games into a definitive rulebook. Inspired by the lawn game of horseshoes, balls would be pitched underhanded towards the batter to initiate the action of the game. The purpose of pitching was to entice the batter to swing and put the ball into play, similar to how a basketball referee throws the jump ball at the start of a game. The called strike rule in the 1858 NABBP rulebook drastically changed the nature of the game. Pitchers used the new strikeout rules to throw faster pitches. Catchers inched closer to home plate as the new rules stated that balls were fair if not caught. Pitches were supposed to be thrown underhanded during this period, though pitchers regularly skirted the rules. Pitchers such as Jim Creighton and Candy Cummings dominated this era of baseball with their lightning-fast pitches and curveballs, respectively. The lone umpire on the field found it difficult to enforce the stringent rules surrounding pitch release points and elbow and wrist movement. Overhand pitching would not be allowed in Major League Baseball until 1884. Doug Allison became the first catcher to stand directly behind the batter. He did so in order to prevent runners from stealing bases, effectively inventing the pitch-out. Other catchers soon followed suit. Cummings' curveball first debuted in 1867 and was made possible by his catcher standing directly behind home plate to be able to catch the first breaking ball. In 1870, Allison became the first known player to wear a baseball glove when he donned a mitten made of buckskin in order to protect his hands. While there were reports of players wearing gloves before Allison, his adoption caught on. Allison was a member of the Cincinnati Red Stockings, the very first professional baseball team. A professional player adopting the glove signaled to others that it was here to stay. Players of the day repurposed gloves from their various professions. Allison, a bricklayer by trade before becoming a professional ball player, likely wore gloves from his profession before seeking out thicker gloves to protect his hands. Other players used their gloves from their jobs as railroad brakemen or carriage drivers, repurposing them as baseball gloves by cutting off the fingers to allow for better grip. In 1911, Albert G. Spalding, founder of the eponymous sports equipment company, published the book America's National Game. In it, Spalding elucidates the details of the early history of baseball and the baseball glove. The first glove I ever saw on the hand of a ball player in a game was worn by Charles C. Waite in Boston in 1875. He had come from New Haven and was playing at first base. The glove worn by him was a flesh color with a large round opening in the back. If anyone wore padded glove before this date, I do not know it. In 1875, first baseman Charles Waite became the first known fielder to wear a glove. His was flesh-colored as to avoid threats to his masculinity. Still, fans jeered at him from the stands, calling him a sissy. 1 year after Waite debuted the baseball glove, A.G. Spalding founded his sports equipment company. Spalding, then a pitcher for the Chicago White Stockings, founded the company in Chicago alongside his brother. They produced the first standardized baseball, which was adopted by the National League in 1880 as the official ball. The sporting goods concern grew rapidly and expanded into other sporting goods. One of their first official products was the baseball glove. Gloves in these days were primitive, and they were used to deflect the ball into the dirt and pick them up afterwards, rather than catching them in the glove. There was no padding, and the hard baseballs injured players' hands and even broke their fingers. Spalding himself began to wear one in 1877, and his reputation excised some of the shame of wearing a glove to play ball. Though, fans and purists of the game continued to heckle players for wearing gloves for some time thereafter. In 1874, Austin C. Butts of East Orange, New Jersey opened for business. He manufactured and sold gloves made of buckskin, dogskin, and fur. His thriving business eventually produced sporting goods, including boxing gloves and eventually baseball gloves. In 1877, he applied for the first patent for a sporting glove and was granted the patent less than a year later. His design was similar to bricklayer gloves of the time, though with a laced-up back to secure the padding on the index finger and thumb. 5 years later, he applied for another patent for a new baseball glove. This model improved upon the way the gloves were cut out of the forms. The design was fingerless, open-backed, and padded. In 1887, brothers George and Alfred Rawlings founded their eponymous sporting goods company in St. Louis, Missouri. Rawlings Sporting Goods was among the first companies to produce baseball gloves. In 1885, George Rawlings patented the padded glove. Since 1957, the prestigious Rawlings Gold Glove Award is awarded annually to the best fielder at each position in both the National and American leagues. In 1885, Providence Grays shortstop Arthur Irwin suffered from 2 broken fingers. He added padding to his buckskin carriage driving glove and shopped it to various sporting goods companies, such as J.F. Draper, which would eventually become Draper and Maynard. He continued to wear the glove after his hand had healed. Soon, other players in the league began to follow the trend. In 1888, professional catcher Joe Gunson claimed to have invented the first catcher's mitt. The circular design was made by Gunson by patting the fingers and tying them together with sheepskin and belts. Harry Decker patented this design in 1890. There are other claimants as well. Whomever truly invented the catcher's mitt transformed the game of baseball forever. Decker eventually sold his patent to Spalding, who began to produce the mitts soon after. In 1895, the Rules Committee of the National League ruled that gloves could only be 10 ounces in weight and 14 inches in circumference. However, catchers and first basemen were allowed to use gloves of any size. Spalding and Rawlings continued to produce gloves that were standardized sizes and weights as opposed to the homemade gloves people had been using for the past decade. By the 1890s, the baseball glove had become ubiquitous. Jerry Denny retired in 1894, having played his entire career without wearing a glove. The last holdout was Cincinnati Reds second baseman Bid McPhee. On April 16, 1895, in the first game of the season, he showed up to the game wearing a glove. At the turn of the century, every player in the league now wore a baseball glove. As automobiles increased in popularity, horses began to be used less frequently. Horses were abundant, so their hides began to be used for baseball gloves. Most gloves of the early 20th century were made with horsehide. Draper and Maynard manufactured some of the best quality and best-selling gloves between 1900 and 1920. Neat's foot oil, made from the shin bones and feet of cattle, had been used for softening, conditioning, and preserving leather as far back as the 1700s. Players in the early 1900s began to use the oil for the first time in order to treat their baseball gloves in order to break them in and preserve them. As early as 1905, Spalding began to produce gloves with a strip of leather connecting the thumb and index finger. This primitive design prevented the ball from rolling out of the glove, but fielders could not catch the ball with it as they do today. During this period, many fielders favored the mitt design rather than the glove design with individual fingers. All fielders, regardless of position, were allowed to wear mitts. In 1908, Alfred Reach of the A.J. Reach Company patented the diverted seam, enhancing the performance and durability. By repositioning the seams on the gloves, it reduces tension on the high-stress areas, especially the pocket and webbing. In 1920, Bill Doak, pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, introduced a groundbreaking idea to Rawlings. Incorporate laced webbing between the index finger and thumb of baseball gloves. Although webbing had been utilized in gloves previously, Doak's innovative net design significantly enhanced the glove's functionality by creating a more defined and secure pocket. This modification revolutionized players' ability to catch and retain the ball within the webbing, providing greater control and stability. Consequently, the glove's increased durability ensured it maintained its shape, reducing the likelihood of the ball slipping out. This ultimately resulted in a significant decline in fielding errors since 1920. While the league's overall skill has improved, particularly with the integration of the Negro Leagues, the Doak design played a pivotal role in elevating fielding standards. Bill Doak patented his design and subsequently sold it to Rawlings. This move propelled Rawlings ahead of Spalding in sales for the first time, establishing Rawlings as the preferred glove among professional baseball players. Even today, approximately 50% of professional baseball players opt for a Rawlings glove, underscoring the enduring impact of Doak's innovation in the sport. Honus Wagner, a Hall of Famer and one of the greatest shortstops of all time, was the first athlete to endorse a piece of sports equipment. In 1905, he worked with Hilrich and Bradsby to design a signature baseball bat. 10 years later, he became the first athlete to endorse a baseball glove, again partnering with Hilrich and Bradsby to design the Honus Wagner signature baseball glove. This trend would continue. Harry Latina worked at Rawlings for over 39 years, leaving an indelible mark on the world of glove design. His extensive career included collaborations with Hall of Famers Hank Greenberg and Johnny Bench, spanning nearly 4 decades. The 1930s witnessed a decline in the sale of baseball gloves amid the Great Depression, while the 1940s brought about significant challenges during World War II. Leather and essential resources were diverted to the war effort. In response, baseball glove designs underwent modifications, incorporating synthetic materials as a viable alternative. This strategic shift resulted in the mass production and shipment of hundreds of thousands of baseball gloves to American servicemen stationed in Japan. This fueled the enduring popularity of baseball in Japan for years to come. In 1957, Wilson released the A2000. This baseball glove was designed with heavy input from professional players. It had customization options, allowing for wrist adjustments and finger stalls. It used moisture-wicking materials to keep players' hands dry throughout the game. The leather was of high-quality cowhide rather than horsehide, pigskin, or buckskin of the previous era. Cowhide would continue to be the preferred leather for use in baseball gloves, and the A2000 model is still used by players today. Wilson baseball gloves are worn by around a third of professional players in Major League Baseball today. Rawlings dominated the glove market in the 1960s. Throughout the decade, companies experimented with different types of leather as well as synthetic materials. Gloves began to become increasingly specialized as different fielding positions preferred different designs. The 1970s marked a significant milestone in baseball glove evolution with the advent of the Velcro closure, swiftly becoming the industry standard. Simultaneously, softball grew in popularity, prompting numerous businesses to form softball teams. To cater to the growing demand for softball-specific gloves, manufacturers widened gloves to accommodate the larger size of softballs. Softball gloves are around 3/4 of an inch larger than baseball gloves at each position. While baseball gloves of the 1970s closely resemble their modern counterparts, a few enhancements have emerged in recent decades, including pre-broken-in gloves, a surge in position-specific designs, and a broadened spectrum of customization and color options. In contemporary times, a trend has emerged with the concerted effort towards more eco-conscious designs. Sustainable practices and synthetic materials are increasing in popularity and could become the norm in years to come. Current-day baseball gloves have evolved significantly from their ancestors 150 years ago. Catcher's mitts, characterized by their lack of individual fingers and ample padding, have become highly specialized tools. First basemen now use elongated and wide mitts to facilitate the efficient scooping of balls in the infield. Infield gloves are small, with shallow pockets to be able to remove the ball easily to throw to base, while outfield gloves are deeper to catch fly balls. Pitchers wear opaque gloves to obfuscate their pitch in their hand and even have rules about which colors they can use so as to prevent distracting the batter. Overall, the transformation of baseball gloves is remarkable, transitioning from the early days of repurposed workman's tools to the current era of highly specialized fielding instruments. This evolution has not only minimized errors, but also provided enhanced protection, preventing numerous broken hands in the process. This essential piece of equipment has become and will remain an integral part of America's pastime for generations to come.